Today, we are diving into one of the most sudden and dramatic falls from power you'll ever read about, the story of King Saul. We're going to look at how Israel's very first king managed to lose literally everything in a single, catastrophic day that changed the course of a nation. And that really brings us to the core question of this whole story. I mean, how does that even happen? How does a king, the anointed leader of his people, lose it all? His kingdom, his heirs, his own life, in the span of just a few hours? It's a heck of a story, so let's unpack it. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Israelite army is squared up against their old enemy, the Philistines. And for King Saul and his entire kingdom, well, everything is on the line. Right from the start, the battle is a complete and utter disaster. And we're not talking about a strategic retreat here. This is a full-blown rout. The Israelite army just breaks and runs, and they're getting cut down as they flee. The whole of Mount Gilboa is basically turning into a graveyard. It's a total nightmare. And this is where the defeat gets deeply, deeply personal. See, the Philistines aren't just trying to win a battle. They are systematically wiping out a dynasty. They hunt down and kill Saul's sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, one by one. In just a few moments, the entire line of succession for the throne of Israel is gone. Just like that. So with his army totally shattered and all his sons dead on the battlefield, King Saul is completely alone. The fight is closing in on him, and he's forced to make one last, desperate choice that is going to seal his fate forever. Just try to imagine that scene for a second. The absolute chaos, the noise, and right in the middle of it is the king himself. He's been hit, he's wounded, and he's cornered by enemy archers. There is no way out. The battle is lost, and now for Saul, it's become a personal trap. The once mighty king is now just a hunted man. And at this moment, he gives a really chilling command to his armor-bearer. He calls his enemies these uncircumcised fellows, which just shows his contempt for them, but also his deep, deep fear of being dishonored. For Saul, being captured, tortured, and paraded around as a trophy, well, that was a fate far worse than death. He was determined to control his own end. But his armor-bearer, he's just frozen. I mean, think about it. On one hand, his sworn duty is to obey his king's command. But on the other hand, to actually strike down God's anointed king, that was completely unthinkable, a massive taboo. He's just paralyzed by loyalty and fear, and he can't do it. He refuses. So Saul realizes he has to do it himself. He takes his own sword, and in one final act of defiance, he falls on it. And then, in just an unbelievable display of loyalty, his armor-bearer sees that his king is dead, and he does the exact same thing, dying right there beside him. But believe it or not, the story doesn't end there. With Saul and his sons dead, the Philistines claim their victory. And what they decide to do next is a very calculated, very deliberate act of national humiliation. They're going to turn the fallen king into the ultimate symbol of their absolute triumph. So, when they find the bodies, the public desecration begins. They strip Saul's body and they take his head and his armor to send messengers out to proclaim their victory everywhere. His armor is put on display in the temple of their gods, basically a sign that their gods are stronger. And then in a final gruesome act, they hang his head in the temple of Dagon. This was the ultimate propaganda win. Just when the story seems like it couldn't possibly get any darker, a little flicker of light appears. Because news of what the Philistines have done reaches an Israelite city called Jabesh Gilead, and it sparks this incredible act of courage and loyalty. These men, they were not about to let their king be dishonored like that. So all their best warriors, they march all night long deep into enemy territory. They actually go and take down the bodies of Saul and his sons, bring them all the way back home for a proper burial, and then they fast for 7 days to mourn him. It's just this incredible, defiant act of honor in the face of total defeat. So, okay, we've seen how Saul fell. It was brutal. But that still leaves the biggest question, right? The question of why? Why did this happen? Well, the source text gives a very clear and final judgment on the matter, and it frames this whole tragedy as something much, much bigger than just a lost battle. See, the narrative tells us the reason for Saul's downfall wasn't really about military tactics. It points to two huge spiritual failures. First, he'd become unfaithful and didn't keep the word of the Lord. And second, instead of asking God for guidance, he got desperate and turned to a forbidden medium, a witch. He had completely lost his way. And this is the final stark takeaway from the text. Saul's death wasn't just a random tragedy of war. It's presented as a direct consequence of his actions, a divine verdict that didn't just end his life, but also ended his reign and transferred the entire kingdom over to David. Saul's tragic fall becomes the necessary prologue to the rise of Israel's most famous king. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of our destiny is in our own hands, and how much is part of a story that's already been written?